I'm here at the slaughter pen in Murfreesboro, Tennessee, where in December 1862 into January 1863, the Confederate Army under Braxton Bragg and the Union Army under William Rosecrans kind of slugged it out for a couple days. And one of, I think, really the littlest visited and read and littlest understood battles that I've been to, but incredibly important. And so I'm here in the slaughter pen, where on December 31st, 1862, horrible, deadly action occurred between those two armies. But here at Stones River, this isn't my story to tell. I'm going to let Sam Watkins from the 1st Tennessee Company Aytch, I'm going to let him tell the story. We are in the Union position, and it is across this field upon which Braxton Bragg's army advanced. Polk's brigade, which included Company Aytch of the 1st Tennessee. And so here's how Sam Watkins described it. The next day, the Yankees were found out to be advancing. Soon they came in sight of our picket. We kept falling back and firing all day. We were relieved by another regiment about dark. We rejoined our regiment. Line of battle was formed on the north bank of Stones River on the Yankee side. Bad generalship, I thought. It was Christmas. John Barleycorn was the general-in-chief. Our generals and colonels and captains had kissed John a little too often. That means they were pretty sauced. They couldn't see straight. It was said to be Buckeye whiskey. They couldn't tell our own men from Yankees. The private could, but he was no general, you see. But here they were, the Yankees. A battle had to be fought. We were ordered forward. I was on the skirmish line. We marched plumb into the Yankee lines with their flags flying. I was called Lieutenant Colonel Fearson's attention to the Yankees, and he remarked, "Well, I don't know whether they're Yankees or not, but if they are, they'll come out of there mighty quick." And here we are looking at the Yankee position. The Yankees marched over a hill out of sight. We were ordered forward to the attack. We were right upon the Yankee line on the Wilkerson Turnpike. The Yankees were shooting our men down by the scores. A universal cry was raised. "You're firing on your own men! Cease firing! Cease firing!" I helloed. In fact, the whole skirmish line helloed and kept on telling them that they were Yankees and to shoot. But the orders were to cease firing. "You're firing on your own men." Captain James of Cheatham's staff was sent forward and killed in his own yard. We were not 20 yards off from the Yankees, and they were pouring the hot shot and shells right into our ranks, and every man was yelling at the top of his voice, "Cease firing! You're firing on your own men! Cease firing! You're firing on your own men!" Oakley, the color bearer of the 4th Tennessee Regiment, ran right up in the midst of the Yankee line with his colors, begging his men to follow. I helloed till I was hoarse. "They're Yankees. They're Yankees. Shoot! They're Yankees." The crest occupied by the Yankees was belching loud with fire and smoke, and the rebels were falling like leaves of autumn in a hurricane. The leaden hail storm swept them off the field. They fell back and reformed. General Cheatham came up and advanced. I didn't fall back, but continued to load and shoot until a fragment of shell struck me in the arm, and then a mini-ball passed through the same, paralyzing my arm, and wounded and disabled me. General Cheatham all the time was calling out to the men to go forward, saying, "Come on, boys. Follow me." The impression that General Frank Cheatham made upon my mind, leading the charge on the Wilkerson Turnpike, I will never forget. I saw either victory or death written on his face. When I saw him leading our brigade, although I was wounded at the time, I felt sorry for him. He seemed so earnest and concerned as he was passing me, and I said, "Well, General, if you are determined to die, I will die with you." We were at that time at least 100 yards in advance of the brigade, Cheatham all the time calling upon the men to come on. He was leading the charge in person. Then it was that I saw the power of one man, born to command over a multitude of men, then almost routed and demoralized. I saw and felt that he was not fighting for glory, that he was fighting for his country because he loved that country and he was willing to give his life for his country and the success of our cause. He deserves a wreath of immortality and a warm place in every Southron's heart for his brave and glorious example on that bloody battlefield of Murfreesboro. Yes, his history will ever shine in beauty and grandeur as a name among the brightest in all the galaxy of leaders in the history of our cause. Now, another fact I'll state, and that is, when the private soldier was ordered to charge and capture the 12 pieces of artillery heavily supported by infantry, Maney's brigade raised a whoop and a yell and swooped down on those Yankees like a whirl-a-gust of woodpeckers in a hailstorm. Paying the blue-coated rascals back with compound interest for what they did come. Every man's gun was loaded, and they marched upon the blazing crest in a solid file. And when they did fire, there was a sudden lull in the storm of battle, because the Yankees were nearly all killed. I can't remember now ever seeing more dead men and horses and captured cannon all jumbled together than that scene of blood and carnage and battle on the Wilkerson's Turnpike. The ground was literally covered with bluecoats dead, and if I remember correctly, there were 80 dead horses. By this time, our command had reformed and charged the blazing crest. The spectacle was grand. With cheers and shouts, they charged up the hill, shooting down and bayoneting the flying cannoneers. General Cheatham, Colonel Field, and Joe Lee cutting and slashing with their swords. The victory was complete. The whole left wing of the Federal Army was driven back 5 miles from their original position. Their dead and wounded were in our lines, and we had captured many pieces of artillery, small arms, and prisoners. And as we look over my shoulder to the positions that Sam Watkins came, he writes, "When I was wounded, the shell and shot that struck me knocked me, winding me. I said, 'Oh, I'm wounded,' and at the same time I grabbed my arm. I thought it had been torn from my shoulder. The brigade had fallen back about 200 yards, when General Cheatham's presence reassured them, and they soon were in line and ready to follow so brave a gallant leader, and that had the order of 'cease firing, your firing on your own men' not been given, Maney's brigade would have the honor of capturing 18 pieces of artillery and 1,000 prisoners. This I do know to be a fact. As I went back to the field hospital, I overtook another man walking along. I don't know what regiment he belonged to, but I remember first noticing that his arm was entirely gone, his face as white as a sheet. The breast and sleeve of his coat had been torn away, and I could see the frazzled end of his shirt sleeve, which appeared to be sucked into the wound. I looked at it pretty close, and I said, "Great God," for I could see his heart throb and the respiration of his lungs. I was filled with wonder and horror at the sight. He was walking along, then all at once he dropped down and died, without a struggle or a groan. I could tell of hundreds of such incidents on the battlefield, but tell only this one, because I remember it so distinctly. This is the cotton field. Over there is the Nashville Pike, which Rosecrans desperately needed to keep open his supply lines in his retreat back to Nashville. And charge after charge, the rebels tried across this field to take it. They were unsuccessful, and Rosecrans saved his army for another day. After the battle, Sam Watkins wandered over the field, and he talked about robbing a Yankee. He doesn't say exactly where. Let me take this opportunity. Watkins wrote, "In passing over the battlefield, I came across a dead Yankee colonel. Had on the finest clothes I ever saw, a red sash and a fine sword. I particularly noticed his boots. I needed them, and I made up my mind to wear them out for him. But I couldn't bear the thought of wearing dead men's shoes. I took hold of the foot and raised it up and made one trial at the boot to get it off. I happened to look up, and the colonel had his eyes wide open, and he seemed to be looking at me. He was stone dead, but I dropped that foot quick. It was my first and last attempt to rob a dead Yankee." After the battle was over at Murfreesboro, that night John Tucker and myself thought we would investigate the contents of a fine brick mansion in our immediate front, between our lines and the Yankees, and even in advance of our vedettes. Before we arrived at the house, we saw a body of Yankees approaching, and as we started to run back, they fired upon us. Our pickets had run in and reported a night attack. We ran forward expecting that our men would recognize us, but they opened fire upon us. I never was as bad scared in my whole life, and if any poor devil ever prayed with fervency and true piety, I did on that occasion. I thought, I'm between two fires. I don't think that a flounder or a pancake was half as flat as I was that night. Yeah, it might be called in music a low flat. Go ahead.
My name's Natalie. I'm the STA intern through AmeriCorps. I'm basically the public history intern, so I do tours and talk about the history here at Stones River. The most interesting story to me is probably Julius Garesche. He was born to some French parents, actually in Cuba. He wasn't Cuban, but he was born in Cuba. And he was a very Catholic man. He went to West Point with General William Rosecrans. He actually is sometimes said to be the one who converted Rosecrans to Catholicism, who would actually be a very staunch Catholic through the rest of his life. So when he joined in the Civil War, he was put under Rosecrans because they were friends, so he was his chief of staff. So here, the night before the battle starts, he's seen passing out his personal belongings. His men come to him, they go, "Sir, what are you doing? Why are you passing out your personal belongings? They're yours." He says, "Well, I won't need them," because he had gotten a letter from his brother, who he believed had a premonition that said he was going to die in the first battle he fought in the Civil War, a pretty gruesome death. So he believed his brother, and he said, I'm giving this stuff out because I'll be dead the next day, so I don't need it anymore. His men say, "Well, sir, I'm sure you're fine. Your brother just had a bad dream. Stop giving your stuff away." He then is riding across the field with General Rosecrans one day, the day of the battle, and he gets hit in the head with a cannonball and immediately decapitates him. Rosecrans is said to be close enough that he gets brains and blood all over his shirt. And they say, because he's actually the most documented death on the battlefield, because people wrote home about this, he was on horseback, he was in the stirrups, and he was holding the reins, and without his head, you could only see a little bit of his beard where his chin was still there a little bit. And he rode forward on his horse, still on the horse, no head, and then eventually he fell off. But he was riding for a good little portion before he fell off. And that's why they say he's the true story of the Headless Horseman. So that's about Julius Garesche.
That's my tour of Stones River. I'm off to Spring Hill, and then Franklin, and then Nashville. Thanks for watching.